coming in from the outside and seeing things done that are then created in the real world, right? You use software to create a model. That model turns into a building eventually. That is a fascinating element.
Welcome to the Graphisoft Talk podcast. I'm your host, Nathan Hildebrandt, and today I have the pleasure of interviewing Graphisoft CRO Officer Richard Doll. Now, Richard, it's wonderful to be here in Budapest to actually conduct this podcast with you. Every other podcast that I've run in this series has been remotely over the internet, so it's so good to be here face to face and talking with you.
Same here. I feel great to be here at HQ and do that all together.
Now, starting our conversation off with every other person we've had part of the conversation as part of this series, we want to learn a little bit more about the team at Graphisoft in terms of the team that's behind the products that you guys generate. First of all, it'd be great to learn a little bit about your history in terms of, what did you get excited about in high school? What did you study at university? And what started your journey into your career that you have now?
Yeah, sure. Hope everybody finds it as interesting as I do. So when I was in high school, I was torn apart because I was into all the different subject matters. I was into science, I was into history, into all kinds of different things. And then teachers would pull me into different directions, say, you should come to our class, you should do this. And then eventually decided to go for technology because it was clear in the 80s that's where the money was going to be. So fortunately, I went for the money and then did industrial engineering degree in Munich and started that. But I put it in the back of my mind, one day you have to go back and do something else and get into some other subject matter. So I parked it for the time being. And then I met a founder of a very fancy startup back in Munich. They did video post-production, broadcasting technology. And it was a fascinating company that was already in 7 countries. We had an office in the United States. And I always had this sort of inclination, one day I want to work a little bit in the States on the other side of the ocean. And so these guys got me started in the right way. I was a product manager initially for several years, product manager and product marketing. And then we had the opportunity to move to the States and open an office there. And actually in a new location, we had an office already in the Silicon Valley, but we moved it up to Seattle. And that became a real adventure. And that's how I got started into my professional life. Right? And I started in that initial career of a product manager.
So you started the role as a product manager. Obviously, you find yourself now here in Graphisoft as the Chief Revenue Officer, and you've been with Graphisoft now for around 12 months, I believe.
A little more, going on 14.
So we're just over 12 months. Obviously, your career is, been quite a journey. Talking obviously about the work that you've done since your studies, who are the companies that you've worked for on your journey, and what are the roles you've played past your original engagement in the profession with your product management role?
Yeah. So first company was this company that I just mentioned, Fast Multimedia, global company that was then eventually sold to the market leader, Abbott, which is still the number one in that industry. I actually, as I was finishing out my time there, I was getting into a general manager role. So I actually managed a fairly diverse team in addition to my sort of product management side job at the time then. And then I moved as a general manager, took over a radio automation company that was based in the DC area because public broadcasting was the big customer segment that we were going after. It was also a German company. In between, I had a stint as a product manager, a senior product manager at Inktomi, which was enterprise search. Nobody remembers that anymore, but that was before Google and all that other stuff. Enterprise search was the big deal, and we had content networking, so we built all these hosters in the United States. They bought like packages with their IPO money, and that was a sort of a repeat game that the company played. But then with the dot-com bubble burst, it all tanked for a while. And that's when I moved on, and eventually I actually ended up at a company that everybody knows, at least a certain generation, Novell. For the younger ones, it's no longer a household name, but back then it was the big name next to Microsoft. And there I led a ISV ecosystem team. So I was the director of that team. We had about 20 people managing all the Linux manufacturers. We wanted to get Linux up on top and pass Microsoft. Of course, that dream never came to fruition. But we did quite okay. We got a lot of firms on Wall Street first in financial industry. And so we had to kind of expand the reach of Linux by supporting software manufacturers and getting them to move their applications onto the platform. So that was a very interesting game about ecosystem, partnerships. And of course, I was constantly working with our key account managers in sales. And that was my first real touch point with the sort of heavy hitting, big account, key account sales jobs. And from there, my journey went on for a few more years. I went into South America for Novell. I learned that market. And eventually I turned back to Europe, worked for some startups there, and first time I had a CEO role for a German small startup in the graph database environment. And then from there, I became a business consultant for a number of years. I was an independent one-man show for 7 years, and I worked for a number of different software companies, and I took over interim management jobs. One of my first roles was at Sage as a sales manager for one of their ERP sales teams, and we turned that around quite well. It became a success story. We increased the revenues quite a bit, did the transition to subscription. Everybody is always very in favor of subscription, as we know. So that was how I slowly gravitated into more and more sales-minded roles. And then a few years ago, as part of my engagement in the ACO industry, I was actually working for another brand in the Nemetschek organization, and Nevaris. And Nevaris then at the time had very large construction companies. I wasn't in sales at the time. I did more projects for Nevaris, and I wasn't an employee. And from there, I went on to Think Project. That's when I got in touch with the CDE world. I was the manager of the largest sales region for Think Project, about 50% of the revenue generated there. And that was my last stop before I went to Graphisoft. So that's my journey.
That's an impressive journey. The CV that you have behind, your career it sounds massive, right? And you couldn't even touch on, I guess, all of the things that you've achieved within those roles. But looking to your role now at Graphisoft, the Chief Revenue Officer as a role may not be as familiar to your customers, in terms of Graphisoft customers. Funnily enough, doing a little bit of Google research about what a Chief Revenue Officer is, 25% of companies now around the world actually have those positions in place. What, as a Chief Revenue Officer for Graphisoft, what is the role that you perform, and what are the main tasks that you perform as the Chief Revenue Officer to essentially assist Graphisoft to achieve what it needs to achieve as a company to meet the challenges of your shareholders, but at the same time, your customers. So you've always got that kind of opposing kind of requirements of both parties.
Yeah, so I would say you quite rightly point out that the CRO is to a lot of our customers not a familiar role, because a lot of our customers are medium-sized architectural offices. They don't typically have those roles in their organization. For a software brand with an increased amount of specialization and the way that we monetize software licenses and the complexity of the license models, it became more and more obvious that the CEO cannot be responsible for that in the level of detail that is needed and the attention that's needed to that. So I'm taking over the entire go-to-market approach of the company. The CEO obviously is on top of everything, is in charge of the strategy, in part of the group sort of strategy as well. But as the CRO, I take care of the go-to-market, everything that relates to sales in its various forms, whether it's partner sales, whether it's direct sales, our license models, our pricing structures. For pricing, of course, we work very closely with the product team. And then, of course, in our case, that's not always the same definition, but we decided in the go-to-market function, we include all marketing. So marketing and sales are part of my purview.
So I asked this question of Daniel when I interviewed him near on probably 6 months ago, but because your role now kind of takes on this approach, it's something that I think is really important, I guess, for people that would be watching our conversation today to understand the switch between from perpetual licensing to subscription. How important is that for the success of Graphisoft, first of all? And then secondly, what is the benefit to your customers in transitioning from a perpetual licensing model to that subscription model?
Yeah. I would say the key piece here is we have to find a way to flexibly scale into the future, right? We have to reinvest a lot of our income into future products, and the only way to do this sufficiently is with the subscription models. We are a late starter. I mean, Graphisoft within the Nemetschek group is a late starter, but also when you look at the market, we have waited for many years to switch to that. And part of it is this legacy of Graphisoft being very aware of its own history and being very committed to the customer base, to its history. And it felt wrong to switch.
Yeah.
There was a lot of hesitation in the organization to do that. And quite honestly, a lot of our partners and customers had a hard time to follow us there, right? They wanted to understand, why are you guys doing this? I've purchased the license before, I'm paying for my maintenance. What's the point here, right? And the truth is, subscription is a response to a very dynamic development in the software industry. And our competitors are out there, they're all doing this with subscription. It's a better way to finance how you invest into your future development. And we have to stay nimble, we have to scale, or else we will be just a sideshow over time, and we cannot compete on equal footing with our competitors out there. That is the main reason. The benefit to the customer, this is now, of course, from an inside out look.
Yes.
The customer, of course, doesn't care so much about how we finance our development, of course, in the first place. But the customer should see that having a subscription is also a promise by the manufacturer. We take care of the software continuously. We keep growing this. You always have access to the latest and greatest of what we offer. Of course, so you don't have to overpay of what you need. You go into different subscription plans. That's why you have to have a staircase of entry-level, medium-sized, upper level of subscriptions. And then you may even have side products that only certain customers need. And then you do more flexible subscription plans over time. So I think in fairness to all the customers, you switch to subscription, but you also have to give options to say what fits my needs and can I grow with my needs into a higher level of complexity. And that's what we want to ensure for the customers for their benefit.
So we're sitting here today in Budapest at the Graphisoft Ignite conference. And throughout this event, there's been some big announcements made, obviously around ARCHICAD 29, which has been recently released, but also several other products that Graphisoft have now released as part of its product range. Similar products, I guess, that are included in that conversation piece were obviously the MEP modeler and also Project Aurora. You know, are you able to touch on, for the people that haven't been able to watch the live stream or the videos from the event yet, you know, can you touch on, you know, what these products are and I guess how the value they can add to the packages that your customers or Graphisoft customers can use moving forward?
Yeah, absolutely. Part of what I just said about subscription plans is also very true in taking a broader look at the market and say, what can we deliver to our customers that goes beyond the traditional scope of what ARCHICAD did. ARCHICAD always had an MEP component in it, but it was a little bit of a neglected sort of sideshow inside of the product. We decided, when we look at the market and look at the whole engineering space and everything, how the market has developed now, if we are not offering a full-on product for the MEP space, we are losing out from our own sort of commercial perspective, but we're also delivering not an insufficient set of capabilities to our customers. We want to broaden the range, right? Our traditional customer base are the architects, but there are multidisciplinary firms that have other needs. And not only the large ones, we find medium-sized companies that want MEP because their practice over time developed into that range. And if we don't offer something, somebody else will. Somebody is already out there with these kinds of offerings. So we decided we break out MEP into a product called MEP Designer. And back to what I said earlier, you can also have it with one of the upper ranges of our subscription plans as part of our Collaborate license. Now, MEP is a discipline in and of itself, right? That's why it also exists as a standalone product, and it addresses a different need than the design capabilities of ARCHICAD. but we are using some of our engines and the creativity and the visual sort of guidance that comes with ARCHICAD to make that accessible to the MEP designer as well. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we talk about Project Aurora, which is a product that does not yet sell. It's sort of an early alpha beta stage at this point, but it's the early design element. It's sort of, let's say, everything that comes before building the model, site development, early site sort of exploration, playing with what fits into that space, into that urban space, and taking care of aspects that come before the more granular model is necessary. The difference that we take here is we don't want to just have a sketching tool. We want something that builds a process from that moment on and allows somebody to then take that seamlessly into the model, build the model, but then also when the model evolves over time, go back into that early design stage and have a sort of a bidirectional functionality that allows you to go back and forth between those two stages. And that's something that we believe is going to be a unique approach that Graphisoft is taking here.
Now, I had an opportunity to see the MEP designer, for example, and I look at that as an approach. And I guess some of the critique I've heard in the industry over the last decade has been about the challenges that MEP engineers are facing using particular tools to essentially produce deliverables. And I'm pretty excited when I see these new products because I see the functionality and the methodology in which engineers can model projects. And I see it's a great alternative that's now getting into the market and an opportunity for Graphisoft to expand its customer base. You know, I guess some of the challenges that some of the existing customer base that are architects, long-term users like myself, we sit there and we go, oh, why expand? I personally know why there's a lot of benefits in Graphisoft looking to expand its customer base. But I guess hearing from yourself in your role, what are the benefits to your existing customer base by expanding your offering to a much wider audience of potential customers?
I mean, let's put it this way. A big part of this is having relevance in the market. Being strong as ARCHICAD and as Graphisoft as a brand means also that we can continue to deliver something to our classic customer base. If we don't ensure that we are commercially successful, our established customers will eventually feel it because we can no longer maintain that level of sort of service to them. And I believe as a brand learning from other disciplines and making that thinking part of how we are approaching product design and product delivery, that is something that our customers will feel in all kinds of different, sometimes more subtle ways, right? But it's also something that they can contribute actively. I mean, nothing forces them to stay on the sidelines. Still, I understand that somebody who has 1, 2, 3 architects in their office, in their small office, they may not branch out into that MEP world, right? And we need to have people who are dedicated to that. Just as much as the customer has their own specialization, we also will have engineers that focus on that part. That doesn't mean that we are pulling away from our core resources in building the design element of our product and the core of what ARCHICAD really means. We are very aware of our history and what made us strong. And the pride that we want to create and reignite, that's why we called it Ignite here, our show here. We want to rediscover our history and what made us strong in the first place and apply that to other fields and allow these customers to benefit from that. And that design thinking is, let me borrow a phrase from another company that everybody knows, think different. That was also a big part of the DNA that I see in Graphisoft. And now we're applying it to the MEP space as one first branching out into a different area.
The answer for this question, I think, might be already in what you've said to me as part of your responses so far. But obviously, what's your thoughts on the current state of the AEC industry? And what do you think Graphisoft's role is in contributing to the success of it or fixing a problem that exists within it?
Yeah. I've been an outsider, right? I came from a different part of the software world into the AEC industry. And as an outsider, I came in here and I said, there's a lot of digitalization that still has to happen in this industry, right? I mean, a lot happened in recent years, but there is still a long way to go. I mean, other industries have gone way ahead of this. And I think that's the opportunity here. The fascinating part is, and this is maybe people who have always been in this industry don't believe that, but coming in from the outside and seeing things done that are then created in the real world, right? You use software to create a model, that model turns into a building eventually. That is a fascinating element. I've been in so many theoretical software fields before. You do databases, you do infrastructure. That doesn't really reflect in the real world, right? This is the fascinating part here. And we have all these capabilities now, but in a way, the industry isn't leveraging all of this yet. And we can't do that. Better collaboration across different firms, getting the disciplines connected. The promise of BIM seems old news to anybody who has been in this industry for 30 years. But coming in from the outside, you look at this and you say, this still has so much pull, it still has so much leverage that we can realize. That's, I think, is the fascinating part. I think the promise of BIM is really only happening now, and it continues to deliver in the next few years. I'm sure of that.
So the challenges we have in Australia alone, there's some really great university research that was done into the design and documentation of, say, a townhouse or small unit developments. And it found that 80% of that work was still done in 2D. So there's a massive portion of the market when we're so used to dealing with the bleeding edge of industry and essentially being ahead of industry as you need to be with, as a software provider, you need to know where people are going. It makes it very challenging when you realize that so much of the industry is so far behind where the leaders are. Now, take into consideration those challenges and I guess the issues, where we have industry leaders, the bleeding edge of the 5-10%, which we would have seen we'll see over the next few days, of presentations from customers that are using technology and software to its limits to get really great outcomes, to our people that are still behind, that have opportunities to improve their processes. Where do you see the AEC industry in the next 5 years? And I guess at a high level, from a roadmap strategy position from Graphisoft, where do you see the industry going and how Graphisoft will support the industry moving forward?
Well, as I said, I believe there is so much promise still in these technologies. And I believe one of the things that we will see is that this technology can continue to deliver and empower people from very small beginnings. If you use that capability and you integrate yourself into a workflow of a large firm, you become more relevant in this, right? And I think it is of course a learning curve. And as a manufacturer, we have to make sure that we bring all this complexity in the simplest to understand form to the customers. I mean, there's a lot of talk about AI. Let me branch into that for a second. AI is one way how we can get the complexity down and get the adoption cycle up and accelerate the pace at which people can understand all the capabilities. If I look throughout my entire sort of career, every software that's out there that's used for a specific purpose is underutilized. But in the architectural space and looking at ARCHICAD, I think there is so much capability in these products, and a large amount of users is only using a fraction of this, right? You said it, 2D plans are still the norm. And maybe it has to do with the sort of inhibitions to kind of go that way. And if we can make it easier to adopt these capabilities and see the benefit of making this part of your day-to-day work, I think the individual and even the smaller firms can play a much bigger role here. I think it's also going to be massively competitive out there, right? This is the other side effect of this. The more accessible and the more flat you make the competitive landscape, the more competition you have from all around you, right? That's the reality we see in every market where these kinds of technology adoptions happen. But I would say the industry is going to be much more digital in the next few years, and I see the pace of innovation just explode. And I think that's where we want to be playing on early on, and don't be left behind, but stay in the sort of the top of the group of the crowd here that drives the industry.
Now, having so much experience in the software industry and even bringing your experiences from other roles in software that was not AECO related, One of the things I think that's really critical is that architects understand very much their processes and how they work. But obviously sometimes there's criticism about things that don't occur in a software. To assist, I guess, the people that are your customers to understand a little bit more, what would be one of the insights that you'd have about software development that would be something that you think that your customers wouldn't understand or wouldn't currently understand or know about? So that kind of gives them a bit of understanding of, you know, the challenges and the roles that you play in your area in terms of actually bringing products to market.
Well, I think it's hard to translate that into the language of the customer, because the customer is always very deeply inside of their own issues of problems they want to solve, and the delivering a project, making money with that project. I wouldn't even expect them to care so much about the challenge that we have, right? One thing we can do is maybe to bridge a little bit the world of software engineering and the application and the user side is, again, I'm going back to the AI example. When you start interfacing with the software in a more dynamic way, you're not just using elements from a menu and it's sort of static and repeated, but you actually become more a creative part of how you develop and how you engineer the outcome. You get a sense for what's behind, right? What's the capability of the technology? And I expect we need to create a playful environment that's still professional, of course, where people can experiment with the capabilities and reach into this. It will always be hard to understand the complexity of software and what goes into building a release, building a stable product, all the interfaces into all these third-party applications. We have to take that complexity away from the customer, right? The customer should never be expected to worry about that. And that is going to be one of the big pieces of us now going into a broader product portfolio. We will have to interface with a lot more other systems out there. That makes it interesting for customers. Customers are faced with all these formats and going from one sort of environment into the next, deliver an outcome that the next person in the chain can actually work with. That is something that we have to simplify to the extent that they don't even feel it anymore. And then at the end of the day, if they never see the complexity behind the curtains, then we have done the right job.
That's exactly right. You want it to be like the duck in water, right? Where on the top, the user experience is one that's simple and elegant, but underneath all the work's occurring under the surface. Richard, it's been great learning, I guess, about your role as a CRO and the direction that Graphisoft is taking moving into the future. One of the last questions I love to ask my guests on this podcast is to learn a bit more about you as a person rather than just being a piece of Graphisoft. And I have taken interest in your hobbies. You know, can you share with us today, you know, one of your hobbies or multiple hobbies that you may have that you love, that you have outside of Graphisoft?
Sure. That leads me actually back to the beginning of our conversation when I said I was going to do something outside of technology. So in the 2000s, after 9/11, there was a lot going through my mind, and I ended up deciding to go for a politics degree. I studied international relations. I lived in Boston at the time, and got my master's. And it was a good way to channel this energy. Since I have this fable for history, for politics, I don't make money on this. I'm not doing it for any financial gain. My day job is good enough for that. It's something that allows me to kind of explore things that are not part of my day-to-day technology-minded world, right? And that's a healthy thing. I'm an avid reader in this. I read up on all kinds of periods and backgrounds. So that's a good way to keep me balanced. And then the second part of that story is I have a 7-year-old daughter who keeps me honest when I come home at night. By challenging just totally different things than what I'm used to, right? So you're not the CRO at home when you have a 7-year-old, you're just a guy. And that's very healthy, keeps you grounded.
And I find personally, my view on the world has changed since I've had children, more so in the sense that I feel like I'm thinking more for the future than I have in the past.
Yeah, we all have a responsibility to leave something behind that works for the next generations, right? And it seems a little over the top when you say that, but everybody in their professional life shapes a little bit of this world, right? And we in the architectural space, we definitely shape the world. I mean, I don't because I'm not building buildings, but the people who are using our software certainly do. And having that kind of conscience is a healthy thing to have, right? And your kids definitely give you that sense that there's more.
So Richard, thank you so much for taking time out of your day today to sit down with me and share with me your journey as a professional, your role as a CRO at Graphisoft, and some insights into, your passions for politics and international relations. I really like that. Thanks a lot.
Thank you too. It was a pleasure.
Now, this episode brings to a close this season of our Graphisoft Talk podcast. I encourage you, if you have not yet done so, to take the time to go back and watch the previous episodes and learn a little bit more about the team here at Graphisoft. So until next time, keep learning.